Hello, and welcome to Story Hour Series 3, I should say, Episode 2, where we will be continuing She by Ryder Haggard. Last time we began this story where Horace Holly, was charged by his dying friend to take on the guardianship of his son, Leo Vinci, and at the age of 25, Leo was to be given an iron chest which had never been opened, for his eyes only. So this is where we are going to pick up the story with Chapter 3, The Sherd of Amenartes. On the day preceding Leo's 25th birthday, we both journeyed to London and extracted the mysterious chest from the bank where I had deposited it 20 years before. It was, I remember, brought up by the same clerk who had taken it down. He perfectly remembered having hidden it away. Had he not done so, he said, he should have had difficulty in finding it. It was so covered up with cobwebs. In the evening, we returned with our precious burden to Cambridge, and I think that we might both of us have given away all the sleep we got that night and not have been much the poorer. At daybreak, Leo arrived in my room in a dressing gown and suggested that we should at once proceed to business. I scouted the idea as showing an unworthy curiosity. The chest had waited 20 years, I said, so it could very well continue to wait until after breakfast. Accordingly, at 9, an unusually sharp 9, we breakfasted, and so occupied was I with my own thoughts that I regret to state that I put a piece of bacon into Leo's tea in mistake for a lump of sugar. Job, too, to whom the contagion of excitement had, of course, spread, managed to break the handle off my Sèvres china teacup, the identical one I believe that Marat had been drinking from just before he was stabbed in his back. At last, however, breakfast was cleared away, and Job, at my request, fetched the chest and placed it upon the table in a somewhat gingerly fashion, as though he mistrusted it. Then he prepared to leave the room. "Stop a moment, Job," I said. "If Mr. Leo has no objection, I should prefer to have an independent witness to this business, who can be relied upon to hold his tongue unless he is asked to speak." "Certainly, Uncle Horace," answered Leo, for I had brought him up to call me uncle, though he varied the appellation somewhat disrespectfully by calling me old fellow, or even my avuncular relative. Job touched his head, not having a hat on. "Lock the door, Job," I said, "and bring me my dispatch box." He obeyed, and from the box I took the keys that poor Vinci, Leo's father, had given me on the night of his death. There were 3 of them, the largest a comparatively modern key, the second an exceedingly ancient one, and the third entirely unlike anything of the sort that we had ever seen before, being fashioned apparently from a strip of solid silver, with a bar placed across to serve as a handle and leaving some nicks cut in the edge of the bar. It was more like a model of an antediluvian railway key than anything else. "Now are you both ready?" I said, as people do when they are going to fire a mine. There was no answer, so I took the big key, rubbed some salad oil in the wards, and after 1 or 2 bad shots, for my hands were shaking, managed to fit it and shoot the lock. Leo bent over and caught the massive lid in both his hands, and with an effort, for the hinges had rusted, forced it back. Its removal revealed another case covered with dust. This we extracted from the iron chest without any difficulty, and removed the accumulated filth of years from it with a clothes brush. It was, or appeared to be, of ebony, or some such close-grained black wood, and was bound in every direction with flat bands of iron. Its antiquity must have been extreme, for the dense heavy wood was in parts actually commencing to crumble from age. "Now for it," I said, inserting the second key. Job and Leo bent forward in breathless silence. The key turned, and I flung back the lid and uttered an exclamation. And no wonder, for inside the ebony case was a magnificent silver casket, about 12 inches square by 8 high. It appeared to be of Egyptian workmanship, for the 4 legs were formed of sphinxes, and the dome-shaped cover was also surmounted by a sphinx. The casket was of course much tarnished and dinted with age, but otherwise in fairly sound condition. I drew it out and set it on the table. And then, in the midst of the most perfect silence, I inserted the strange-looking silver key and pressed this way and that until at last the lock yielded and the casket stood open before us. It was filled to the brim with some brown shredded material, more like vegetable fibre than paper, the nature of which I have never been able to discover. This I carefully removed to the depth of some 3 inches, when I came to a letter enclosed in an ordinary modern-looking envelope, and addressed in the handwriting of my dear friend Vincy. To my son Leo, should he live to open this casket. I handed the letter to Leo, who glanced at the envelope and then put it down upon the table, making a motion to me to go on emptying the casket. The next thing that I found was a parchment carefully rolled up. I unrolled it, and seeing that it was also in Vincy's handwriting, and headed "Translation of the Uncial Greek Writing on the Potsherd," put it down by the letter. Then followed another ancient roll of parchment that had become yellow and crinkled with the passage of years. This also I unrolled. It was likewise a translation of the same Greek original, but into black-letter Latin, which at the first glance, from the style and character, appeared to me to date from somewhere about the beginning of the 16th century. Immediately beneath this roll was something hard and heavy, wrapped up in yellow linen, and reposing upon another layer of the fibrous material. Slowly and carefully we unrolled the linen, exposing to view a very large but undoubtedly ancient potsherd of a dirty yellow colour. This potsherd had, in my judgment, once been a part of an ordinary amphora of medium size. For the rest, it measured 10.5 inches in length by 7 in width, was about 1/4 of an inch thick, and densely covered on the convex side that lay towards the bottom of the box, with writing in the later Uncial Greek character, faded here and there, but for the most part perfectly legible, the inscription having evidently been executed with the greatest care, and by means of a reed pen, such as the ancients often used. I must not forget to mention that in some remote age this wonderful fragment had been broken in two, and rejoined by means of cement and 8 long rivets. Also, there were numerous inscriptions on the inside, but these were of the most erratic character, and had clearly been made by different hands, and in many different ages, and of them together, with the writings of the parchment, I shall have to speak presently. "Is there anything more?" asked Leo, in a kind of excited whisper. I groped around, and produced something hard, done up in a little linen bag. Out of the bag we took first a very beautiful miniature, done up upon ivory, and, secondly, a small chocolate-coloured composition, scarabaeus, marked thus: symbols which we have since ascertained mean Sutun Se Ra, which is being translated the royal son of Ra, or the sun. The miniature was a picture of Leo's Greek mother, a lovely, dark-eyed creature. On the back of it was written, in poor Vincey's handwriting, "My beloved wife." "That is all," I said. "Very well," answered Leo, putting down the miniature, at which he had been gazing affectionately. "And now let us read the letter." And without further ado, he broke the seal and read aloud as follows. "My son Leo, when you open this, if you ever live to do so, you will have attained to manhood, and I shall have been long enough dead to be absolutely forgotten by nearly all who knew me. Yet in reading it remember that I have been, and for anything you know may still be, and that in it, through this link of pen and paper, I stretch out my hand to you across the gulf of death, and my voice speaks to you from the silence of the grave. Though I am dead, and no memory of me remains in your mind, yet am I with you in this hour that you read. Since your birth to this day, I have scarcely seen your face. Forgive me this. Your life supplanted the life of one whom I loved better than women are often loved, and the bitterness of it endureth yet. Had I lived, I should in time have conquered this foolish feeling, but I am not destined to live. My sufferings, physical and mental, are more than I can bear, and when such small arrangements as I have to make for your future well-being are completed, it is my intention to put a period to them. May God forgive me if I do wrong. At the best, I could not live more than another year." "So he killed himself!" I exclaimed. "I thought so." "And now," Leo went on, without replying, "enough of myself. What has to be said belongs to you who live, not to me, who am dead, and almost as much forgotten as though I had never been. Holly, my friend, to whom, if he will accept the trust, it is my intention to confide you, will have told you something of the extraordinary antiquity of your race. In the contents of this casket you will find sufficient to prove it. The strange legend that you will find inscribed by your remote ancestress upon the potsherd was communicated to me by my father on his deathbed, and took a strong hold in my imagination. When I was only 19 years of age, I determined, as, to his misfortune, did one of our ancestors about the time of Elizabeth, to investigate its truth. Into all that befell me I cannot enter now, but this I saw with my own eyes. On the coast of Africa, in a hitherto unexplored region, some distance to the north of where the Zambezi falls into the sea, there is a headland, at the extremity of which a peak towers up, shaped like the head of an African, similar to that of which the writing speaks. I landed there, and learnt from a wandering native, who had been cast out by his people because of some crime which he had committed, that far inland are great mountains, shaped like cups, and caves surrounded by measureless swamps. I learnt also that the people there speak a dialect of Arabic, and are ruled over by a beautiful white woman who is seldom seen by them, but who is reported to have power over all things living and dead. 2 days after I had ascertained this, the man died of fever contracted in crossing the swamps, and I was forced by want of provisions and by symptoms of an illness, which afterwards prostrated me, to take to my dhow again. Of the adventures that befell me after this, I need not speak now. I was wrecked upon the coast of Madagascar, and rescued some months afterwards by an English ship that brought me to Aden, whence I started for England, intending to prosecute my search as soon as I had made sufficient preparations. On my way I stopped in Greece, and there, for omnia vincit amor, I met your beloved mother and married her, and there you were born and she died. Then it was that my last illness seized me, and I returned hither to die. But still I hoped against hope, and set myself to work to learn Arabic, with the intention, should I ever get better, of returning to the coast of Africa and solving the mystery of which the tradition has lived so many centuries in our family. But I have not got better, and, so far as I am concerned, the story is at an end. For you, however, my son, it is not at an end, and to you I hand on these results of my labour, together with the hereditary proofs of its origins. It is my intention to provide that they shall not be put into your hands until you have reached an age where you will be able to judge for yourself whether or no you will choose to investigate what, if it is true, must be the greatest mystery in the world, or to put it by as an idle fable, originating in the first place in a woman's disordered brain. I do not believe that it is a fable. I believe that if it can only be rediscovered, there is a spot where the vital forces of the world visibly exist. Life exists. Why, therefore, should not the means of preserving it indefinitely exist also? But I have no wish to prejudice your mind about the matter. Read and judge for yourself. If you are inclined to undertake the search, I have so provided that you will not lack for means. If, on the other hand, you are satisfied that the whole thing is a chimera, then, I adjure you, destroy the potsherd and the writings, and let a cause of troubling be removed from our race forever. Perhaps that will be the wisest. The unknown is generally taken to be terrible, not, as the proverb would infer, from the inherent superstition of man, but because it is so often is terrible. He who would tamper with the vast and secret forces that animate the world may well fall a victim to them. And if the end were attained, if at last you emerged from the trial ever beautiful and ever young, defying time and evil, and lifted above the natural decay of flesh and intellect, who shall say that the awesome change would prove a happy one? Choose, my son, and may the power who rules all things, and who says, "Thus far shalt thou go, and thus much shalt thou learn," direct the choice to your own happiness and the happiness of the world, which, in the event of your success, you would one day certainly rule by the pure force of accumulated experience. Farewell! Thus the letter, which was unsigned and undated, abruptly ended. "What do you make of that, Uncle Holly?" said Leo, with a sort of gasp as he replaced it on the table. "We have been looking for a mystery, and we certainly seem to have found one." "What do I make of it? Why, that your poor dear father was off his head, of course," I answered testily. "I guessed as much that night, 20 years ago, when he came into my room. You see, he evidently hurried his own end, poor man. It is absolute balderdash." "That's it, sir," said Job solemnly. Job was a most matter-of-fact specimen of a matter-of-fact class. "Well, let's see what the potsherd has to say, at any rate," said Leo, taking up the translation in his father's writing and commencing to read. "I, Amenartis of the royal house of the pharaohs of Egypt, wife of Callicrates, the beautiful in strength, a priest of Isis, whom the gods cherish and the demons obey, being about to die, to my little son Tisiphenius, the mighty avenger. I fled with thy father from Egypt in the days of Nectanebes, causing him through love to break the vows that he had vowed. We fled southwards, across the waters, and we wandered for twice 12 moons on the coast of Libya, that looks towards the rising sun, whereby a river in a great rock cavern, like the head of an Ethiopian. 4 days on the water from the mouth of a mighty river were we cast away, and some were drowned and some died of sickness. But us wild men took through wastes and marshes, where the sea fowl hid the sky, bearing us 10 days' journey till we came to a hollow mountain, where a great city had been and fallen, and where there are caves of which no man hath seen the end. And they brought us to the queen of the people, who place pots upon the heads of strangers, who is a magician, having a knowledge of all things, and life and loveliness that does not die. And she cast eyes of love upon thy father, Callicrates, and would have slain me and taken him to husband. But he loved me and feared her, and would not. Then did she take us, and lead us by terrible ways, by means of dark magic, to where the great pit is, in the mouth of which the old philosopher lay dead, and showed to us the rolling pillar of life that dies not, whereof the voice is as the voice of thunder. And she did stand in the flames, and come forth unharmed, and yet more beautiful. Then did she swear to make thy father undying, even as she is, if he would but slay me, and give himself to her. For me she could not slay because of the magic of my own people that I have, and that prevailed thus far against her. And he held his hand before his eyes to hide her beauty, and would not. Then in her rage did she smite him by her magic, and he died. But she wept over him, and bore him thence with lamentations. And being afraid, me she sent to the mouth of the great river where the ships come. And I was carried far away on the ships where I gave thee birth. And hither to Athens I came at last after many wanderings. Now I say this to thee, my son, Tisiphenius, seek out the woman and learn the secret of life. And if thou mayest find a way, slay her, because of thy father Callicrates. And if thou dost fear or fail, this I say to all thy seed who come after thee, till at last a brave man be found among them, who shall bathe in the fire and sit in the place of the pharaohs. I speak of those things, that though they be past belief, yet I have known, and I lie not. May the Lord forgive her for that, groaned Job, who had been listening to this marvellous composition with his mouth open. As for myself, I said nothing. My first idea being that my poor friend, being demented, had composed the whole thing, though it scarcely seemed likely that such a story could have been invented by anybody. It was just too original. To solve my doubts, I took up the potsherd and began to read the close uncial Greek writing on it. And very good Greek of the period it is, considering that it came from the pen of an Egyptian born. Here follows a transcription of the text in Greek and in Latin. The English translation is, as I discovered on further investigation, and as the reader may easily see by comparison, both accurate and elegant. Besides the uncial writing on the convex side of the sherd at the top, painted in dull red, on what had once been the lip of the amphora, was the cartouche already mentioned as being on the scarabaeus, which we had also found in the casket. The hieroglyphics or symbols, however, were reversed, just as though they had been pressed on wax. Whether this was the cartouche of the original Callicrates, or of some prince or pharaoh from whom his wife Amenartis was descended, I am not sure, nor can I tell if it was drawn up upon the sherd at the same time that the uncial Greek was inscribed, or copied on more recently from the scarab by some other member of the family. Nor was this all. At the foot of the writing, painted in the same dull red, was the faint outline of a somewhat rude drawing of the head and shoulders of a sphinx wearing two feathers, symbols of majesty, which, though common enough upon the effigies of sacred bulls and gods, I have never before met with on a sphinx. Also, on the right-hand side of this surface of the shirt, painted obliquely in red on the space not covered by the uncial characters, and signed in blue paint, was the following quaint inscription. In the earth and sky and sea, strange things there be. Hoc fecit Dorothea Vinci. Perfectly bewildered, I turned the relic over. It was covered from top to bottom with notes and signatures in Greek, Latin, and English. The first in uncial Greek was by Tissaphenes, the son to whom the writing was addressed. It was, I could not go on. Tissaphenes to his son, Callicrates. Here it is in facsimile. This Callicrates, probably in the Greek fashion, so named after his grandfather, evidently made some attempt to start on the quest, for his entry written in very faint and almost ineligible uncial is, I ceased from my going, the gods being against me. Callicrates to his son. Between these two ancient writings, the second of which was inscribed upside down and was so faint and worn that, had it not been for the transcript of it executed by Vinci, I should scarcely have been able to read it, since, owing to its having been written on that portion of the tile which had, in the course of ages, undergone the most handling, it was nearly rubbed out, was the bold, modern-looking signature of one Lionel Vinci. Aetate Soi 17, which was written thereon, I think, by Leo's grandfather. To the right of this were the initials JBV, and below came a variety of Greek signatures in uncial and cursive character, and what appeared to be some carelessly executed repetitions of the sentence, to my son, showing that the relic was religiously passed on from generation to generation. The next legible thing after the Greek signatures was the word Romae, A-U-C, showing that the family had now migrated to Rome. Unfortunately, however, with the exception of its termination, CVI, the date of their settlement there is forever lost, for just where it had been placed, a piece of potsherd is broken away. Then follow 12 Latin signatures, jotted about here and there, wherever there was a space upon the tile suitable to their inscription. These signatures, with 3 exceptions only, ended with the name Vindex, or the Avenger, which seems to have been adopted by the family after its migration to Rome as a kind of equivalent to the Grecian Tissaphenes, which also means Avenger. Ultimately, as might be expected, this Latin cognomen of Vindex was transformed first into De Vinci, and then into the plain modern Vinci. It is very curious to observe how the idea of revenge, inspired by an Egyptian who lived before the time of Christ, is thus, as it were, embalmed in an English family name. A few of the Roman names inscribed upon the shirt I have actually since found mentioned in history and other records. They were, if I remember, Macius Vindex, Sex Varus, Marilus C. Findivius Vindex. The following list, however, comprises all the Latin names upon the shirt. After the Roman names, there is evidently a gap of the very many centuries. Nobody will ever know now what was the history of the relic during those dark ages, or how it came to have been preserved in the family. My poor friend Vinci, it will be remembered, had told me that his Roman ancestors finally settled in Lombardy, and when Charlemagne invaded it, returned with him across the Alps, and made their home in Brittany, whence they crossed to England in the reign of Edward the Confessor. How he knew this I am not aware, for there is no reference to Lombardy or Charlemagne upon the tile, though, as will presently be seen, there is a reference to Brittany. To continue, the next entries on the sherd, if I may expect a long splash either of blood or red colouring matter of some sort, may accept this indeed, consist of 2 crosses drawn in red pigment, and probably representing crusaders' swords, and a rather neat monogram D.V. in scarlet and blue, perhaps executed by the same Dorothea Vinci who wrote, or rather painted, the doggerel couplet. To the left of this, inscribed in faint blue, were the initials A.V., and after them a date, 1800. Then came what was perhaps as curious an entry as anything upon this extraordinary relic of the past. It is executed in black letter, written over the crosses or crusaders' swords, and dated 1445. As the best plan will be to allow it to speak for itself, I here give the black facsimile together with the original Latin without the contractions, from which it will be seen that the writer was a fair medieval Latinist. Also we discovered, what is still more curious, an English version of the black letter Latin. This, also written in black letter, we found inscribed on a second parchment that was in the coffer, apparently somewhat older in date than that on which was inscribed the medieval Latin translation of the uncial Greek, of which I shall speak presently. This I also give in full. The modernized version of the above black letter translation. This relic is a righty mystical work, and a marvellous, ye which mine ancestors aforetime did convey hither with them from Amorike, which is to seen Britain ye less, and a certain holy clerk should always bear my fadir on hond, that he ought utterly for to frush ye same, affirming that it was formed and conflated of Sathanas himself by art magic and divilish, wherefore my fadir did take ye same and to brast it in twain. But I, John B. Vinci, did save wool ye twa parts thereof, and topied them together again so as ye see. On this day, Monday, next following, after ye feast of Saint Mary ye Blessed Virgine, in ye year of salvation 1445. The next, and save one last entry, was Elizabethan, and dated 1564. A most strange history, and one that did cost my father his life. For in seeking for the place upon the east coast of Africa, his pinnace was sunk by a Portuguese galleon off Lorenzo Marquez, and he himself perished. John Vinci. Then came the last entry, apparently, to judge by the style of writing, made by some representative of the family in the middle of the 18th century. It was a misquotation of the well-known lines in Hamlet, and ran thus: "There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio." And now there remained but one more document to be examined, namely, the ancient black letter translation into medieval Latin of the uncial inscription of the sherd. As will be seen, this translation was executed and subscribed in the year 1495 by a certain learned man, Edmundus de Prato, Edmund Pratt by name, licentiate in canon law of Exeter College, Oxford, who had actually been a pupil of Grocyn, the first scholar who taught Greek in England. No doubt, on the fame of this new learning reaching his ears, the Vinci of the day, perhaps that same John de Vinci who years before had saved the relic from destruction and made the black letter entry on the sherd in in 45, hurried off to Oxford to see if perchance it might avail to dissolve the secret of the mysterious inscription. Nor was he disappointed, for the learned Edmundus was equal to the task. Indeed, his rendering is so excellent an example of medieval learning and Latiny that, even at the risk of sating the learned reader with too many antiquities, I have made up my mind to give it in facsimile, together with an expanded version for the benefit of those who find the contractions troublesome. The translation has several peculiarities on which this is not the place to dwell, but I would in passing call the attention of scholars to the passage Duxerunt autem nos ad reginam adven salis coronatium, which strikes me as a delightful rendering of the original. Here he gives the transcription. Well, I said, when at length I had read out and carefully examined these writings and paragraphs, at least those of them that were still easily legible. That is the conclusion of the whole matter, Leo, and now you can form your own opinion of it. I have already formed mine. And what is it? He asked, in a quick way. It is this. I believe that the potsherd to be perfectly genuine, and that, wonderful as it may seem, it has come down in your family since the 4th century before Christ. The entries absolutely prove it, and therefore, however improbable it may seem, it must be accepted. But there I stop. That your remote ancestress, the Egyptian princess, or some scribe under her direction, wrote that which we see on the sherds, I have no doubt, nor have I the slightest doubt but that her sufferings and the loss of her husband had turned her head, and that she was not right in her mind when she did write it. How do you account for what my father saw and heard there? Asked Leo. Coincidence. No doubt there are bluffs on the coast of Africa that look something like a man's head, and plenty of people who speak bastard Arabic. Also, I believe that there are lots of swamps. Another thing is, Leo, and I am sorry to say it, but I do not believe that your poor father was quite right when he wrote that letter. He had met with a great trouble, and although he had allowed this story to prey on his imagination, and he was a very imaginative man. Anyway, I believe that the whole thing is the most unmitigated rubbish. I know that there are curious things and forces in nature which we rarely meet with, and when we do meet them, cannot understand. But until I see it with my own eyes, which I am not likely to do, I will never believe that there is any means of avoiding death, even for a time, or that there is or was a white sorceress living in the heart of an African swamp. It is bosh, my boy, all bosh. What do you say, Job? I say, sir, that it is a lie, and if it is true, I hope Mr. Leo won't meddle with no such things, for no good can come of it. Perhaps you are both right, said Leo, very quietly. I express no opinion, but I say this. I am going to set the matter at rest once and for all, and if you won't come with me, I will go by myself. I looked at the young man, and saw that he meant what he said. When Leo means what he says, he always puts on a curious look about the mouth. It had been a trick of his from a child. Now, as a matter of fact, I had no intention of allowing Leo to go anywhere by himself, for my own sake, if not for his. I was far too much attached to him for that. I am not a man of many ties or affections. Circumstances have been against me in this respect, and men and women shrink from me, or at least I fancy that they do, which comes to the same thing, thinking, perhaps, that my somewhat forbidding exterior is a key to my character. Rather than endure this, I have to a great extent secluded myself from the world and cut myself off from those opportunities which, with most men, result in the formation of relations more or less intimate. Therefore, Leo was all the world to me, brother, child, and friend, and until he wearied of me, where he went, there I should go too. But of course, it would not do to let him see how great a hold he had over me, so I cast about for some means whereby I might let myself down easy. Yes, I shall go, uncle, and if I don't find the rolling pillar of life, at any rate I shall get some first-class shooting. Here was my opportunity, and I took it. Shooting? I said. Ah, yes, I never thought of that. It must be a very wild stretch of country, and full of big game. I have always wanted to kill a buffalo before I die. Do you know, my boy, I don't believe in the quest, but I do believe in big game. And really, on the whole, if after thinking it over, you make up your mind to go, I will take a holiday and come with you. Ah, said Leo, I thought that you would not lose such a chance. But how about the money? We shall want a good lot. You need not trouble about that, I answered. There is all your income that has been accumulating for years, and besides that, I have saved 2/3 of what your father left to me, as I consider it in trust for you. There is plenty of cash. Very well, then. We may as well stow these things away and go up to town to see about our guns. By the way, Job, are you coming too? It's time you began to see the world. Well, sir, answered Job stolidly, I don't hold much with foreign parts, but if both you gentlemen are going, you will want somebody to look after you, and I am not the man to stop behind after serving for 20 years. That's right, Job, said I. You won't find out anything wonderful, but you will get some good shooting. And now look here, both of you. I won't have a word said to a living soul about this nonsense, and I pointed to the potsherd. If it got out, and anything happened to me, my next of kin would dispute my will on the ground of insanity, and I should become the laughing-stock of Cambridge. That day, 3 months, we were on the ocean, bound for Zanzibar. Chapter 4. The Squall. How different is the scene that I have now to tell from that which has just been told. Gone are the quiet college rooms, gone the wind-swayed English elms, the cawing rooks, and the familiar volumes on the shelves, and in their place there rises a vision of the great calm ocean gleaming in the shaded silver lights beneath the beams of the full African moon. A gentle breeze fills the huge sail of our dhow, and draws us through the water that ripples musically against her side. Most of the men are sleeping forward, for it is near midnight, but a stout swarthy Arab, Mohammed by name, stands at the tiller, lazily steering by the stars. 3 miles or more to our starboard is a low dim line. It is the eastern shore of Central Africa. We are running to the southward, before the northeast monsoon, between the mainland and the reef that for hundreds of miles fringes this perilous coast. The night is quiet, so quiet that a whisper can be heard fore and aft the dhow, so quiet that a faint booming sound rolls across the water to us from the distant land. The Arab at the tiller holds up his hand and says one word, Simba, i.e., lion. We all sit up and listen. Then it comes again, a slow, majestic sound that thrills us to the marrow. Tomorrow by 10 o'clock, I say, we ought, if the captain is not out in his reckoning, which I think very probable, to make the mysterious rock with a man's head and begin our shooting. And begin our search for the ruined city in the fire of life, corrected Leo, taking his pipe from his mouth and laughing a little. Nonsense, I answered. You were airing your Arabic with that man at the tiller this afternoon. What did he tell you? He has been trading, slave trading probably, up and down these latitudes for half of his iniquitous life, and once landed on this very Man Rock. Did he ever hear anything of the ruined city of the caves? No, answered Leo. He says that the country is all swamp behind, and full of snakes, especially pythons, and game, and that no man lives there. But then there is a belt of swamp all along the East African coast, so that does not go for much. Yes, I said, it does. It goes for malaria. You see what sort of an opinion these gentry have of the country? Not one of them will go with us. They think that we are mad, and upon my word I believe that they are right. If ever we see old England again, I shall be astonished. However, it does not greatly matter to me at my age, but I am anxious for you, Leo, and for Job. It's a Tom's fool business, my boy. All right, Uncle Horace. So far as I am concerned, I am willing to take my chance. Look, what is that cloud? And he pointed to a dark blotch upon the starry sky, some miles astern of us. Go and ask the man at the tiller, I said. He rose, stretched his arms, and went. Presently he returned. He says it is a squall, but it will pass far on one side of us. Just then Job came up, looking very stout and English in his shooting suit of brown flannel, and with a sort of perplexed appearance upon his honest round face that had been very common with him since he got into these strange waters. Please, sir, he said, touching his sun hat, which was stuck on to the back of his head in a somewhat ludicrous fashion. As we have got all those guns and things in the whaleboat astern, to say nothing of the provisions in the lockers, I think it would be best if I got down and slept in her. I don't like the looks, here he dropped his voice to a portentous whisper, of these gentry. They have such a wonderful thievish way about them. Supposing now that some of them were to slip into the boat at night and cut the cable, and make off with her. That would be a pretty go, that would. The whaleboat, I may explain, was one specially built for us at Dundee, in Scotland. We had brought it with us, as we knew that this coast was a network of creeks, and that we might require something to navigate them with. She was a beautiful boat, 30 feet in length, with a centre board for sailing, copper bottom to keep the worm out of her, and a full of watertight compartments. The captain of the dhow had told us that when we reached the rock, which he knew, and which appeared to be identical with the one described upon the Sheridan by Leo's father, he would probably not be able to run up to it on account of the shallows and the breakers. Therefore we had employed 3 hours that very morning, whilst we were totally becalmed, the wind having dropped at sunrise, in transferring most of our goods and chattels to the whaleboat, and placing the guns, ammunition, and preserved provisions in the watertight lockers specially prepared for them, so that when we did sight the fabled rock, we should have nothing to do but step into the boat and run her ashore. Another reason that induced us to take this precautionary step was that Arab captains are apt to run past the point that they are making, either from carelessness or owing to a mistake in its identity. Now, as sailors know, it is quite impossible for a dhow which is only rigged to run before the monsoon to beat back against it. Therefore we got our boat ready to row for the rock at any moment. Well, Job, I said, perhaps it would be as well. There are lots of blankets there. Only be careful to keep out of the moon, or it may turn your head or blind you. Lord, sir, I don't think it would much matter if it did. It is that turned already with the sight of these moors and their thieving ways. They only fit for muck, they are, and they smell bad enough for it already. Job, it will be perceived, was no admirer of the manners and customs of our dark-skinned brothers. Accordingly, we hauled up the boat by the tow rope till it was right under the stern of the dhow, and Job bundled it into her with all the grace of a falling sack of potatoes. Then we returned and sat down on the deck again, and smoked and talked in little gusts and jerks. The night was so lovely, and our brains were so full of suppressed excitement of one sort and another, that we did not feel inclined to turn in. For nearly an hour we sat thus, and then, I think, we both dozed off. At least I have a faint recollection of Leo sleepily explaining that the head was not a bad place to hit a buffalo, if you could catch him exactly between the horns, or send your bullet down its throat, or some nonsense of the sort. Then I remember no more, till suddenly a frightful roar of wind, a shriek of terror from the awakening crew, and a whip-like sting of water in our faces. Some of the men ran to let the halyards and the lower sail down, but the parrel jammed and the yard would not come down. I sprang to my feet and hung on to a rope. The sky aft was dark as pitch, but the moon still shone brightly ahead of us and lit up the blackness. Beneath its sheen, a huge white top breaker, 20 feet high or more, was rushing onto us. It was on the break. The moon shone on its crest and tipped its foam with light. On it rushed beneath the inky sky, driven by the awful squall behind it. Suddenly, in the twinkling of an eye, I saw the black shape of the whaleboat cast high into the air on the crest of the breaking wave. Then, a shock of water, a wild rush of boiling foam, and I was clinging for my life to the shroud. I swept straight out from it like a flag in a gale. We were pooped. The wave passed. It seemed to me that I was under water for minutes. Really, it was seconds. I looked forward. The blast had torn out the great sail, and high in the air it was fluttering away to leeward like a huge wounded bird. Then for a moment there was comparative calm, and in it I heard Job's voice yelling wildly, "Come here to the boat!" Bewildered and half drowned as I was, I had the sense to rush aft. I felt the dhow sinking under me. She was full of water. Under the counter the whaleboat was tossing furiously, and I saw the Arab Mohammed, who had been steering, leap into her. I gave one desperate pull at the tow rope to bring the boat alongside. Wildly I sprang also. Job caught me by one arm, and I rolled into the bottom of the boat. Down went the dhow bodily, and as she did so, Mohammed drew his curved knife and severed the fibre rope by which we fast to her, and in another second we were driving before the storm over the place where the dhow had been. "Great God!" I shrieked. "Where is Leo? Leo! Leo!" "He's gone, sir. God help him," roared Job into my ear, and as such was the fury of the squall that his voice sounded like a whisper. I wrung my hands in agony. Leo was drowned, and I was left alive to mourn him. "Look out!" yelled Job. "Here comes another!" I turned. A second huge wave was overtaking us. I half hoped that it would drown me. With a curious fascination, I watched its awful advent. The moon was nearly hidden now behind the wreaths of the rushing storm, but a little light still caught the crest of the devouring breaker. There was something dark on it, a piece of wreckage. It was on us now, and the boat was nearly full of water. But she was built in airtight compartments. Heaven bless the man who invented them, and lifted up through it like a swan. Through the foam and turmoil, I saw the black thing on the wave hurrying right at me. I put out my right arm to ward it from me, and my hand closed on another arm, the wrist of which my fingers gripped like a vice. I am a very strong man, and had something to hold to, but my arm was nearly torn off from its socket by the strain and weight of the floating body. Had the rush lasted another 2 seconds, I must either have let go or gone with it. But it passed, leaving us up to our knees in water. "Bail out! Bail out!" shouted Job, suiting the action to the word. But I could not bail just then, for as the moon went out and left us in total darkness, one faint, flying ray of light lit upon the face of the man I had gripped, who was now half lying, half floating in the bottom of the boat. It was Leo. Leo brought back by the wave, back dead or alive from the very jaws of death. Bail out, yelled Job, or we shall founder. I seized a large tin bowl with a handle to it, which was fixed under one of the seats, and the three of us bailed away for dear life. The furious tempest drove over and round us, flinging the boat this way and that. The wind and the storm's wreaths and the sheet's stinging sprays blinded and bewildered us. But through it all we worked like demons with the wild exhilaration of despair. For even despair can exhilarate. 1 minute, 3 minutes, 6 minutes, the boat began to lighten, and no fresh wave swamped us. 5 minutes more, and she was fairly clear. Then, suddenly, above the awful shriekings of the hurricane came a duller, deeper roar. Great heavens! It was the voice of the breakers. At that moment the moon began to shine forth again, this time behind the path of the squall. Out far across the torn bosom of the ocean shot the ragged arrows of her light, and there, half a mile ahead of us, was a white line of foam, then a little space of open-mouthed blackness, and then another line of white. It was the breakers, and their roar grew clearer and yet more clearer as we sped down upon them like a swallow. There they were, boiling up in a snowy spouts of spray, smiting and gnashing together like gleaming teeth of hell. "Take the tiller, Mohammed!" I roared in Arabic. "We must try and shoot them." At the same moment I seized an oar and got it out, motioning to Job to do likewise. Mohammed clambered aft and got hold of the tiller, and with some difficulty Job, who had sometimes pulled a tub upon the homely cam, got out his oar. In another minute the boat's head was straight on to the ever-nearing foam, towards which she plunged and tore with the speed of a racehorse. Just in front of us the first line of breakers seemed a little thinner than to the right or left. There was a gap, or rather deeper water. I turned and pointed to it. "Steer for your life, Mohammed!" I yelled. He was a skilful steersman, and well acquainted with the dangers of this most perilous coast, and I saw him grip the tiller, bend his heavy frame forward, and stare at the foaming terror till his big round eyes looked as though they would start out of his head. The send of the sea was driving the boat's head round to starboard. If we struck the line of breakers 50 yards to starboard of the gap, we must sink. It was a great field of twisting, spouting waves. Mohammed planted his foot against the seat before him, and, glancing at him, I saw his brown toes spread out like a hand with the weight he put upon them as he took the strain of the tiller. She came round a bit, but not enough. I roared to Job to back water, whilst I dragged and laboured at my oar. She answered now, and none too soon. Heavens, we were in them! And then followed a couple of minutes of heart-breaking excitement, such as I cannot hope to describe. All that I remember is a shrieking sea of foam, out of which the billows rose here, there, and everywhere, like avenging ghosts from the ocean grave. Once we turned right round, but either by chance or through Mohammed's skilful steering, the boat's head came straight again before a breaker filled us. One more, a monster. We were through it, or over it, more through than over, and then, with a wild yell of exultation from the Arab, We shot out into the comparative smooth water of the mouth sea between the teeth-like lines of gnashing waves. But we were nearly full of water again, and not more than half a mile ahead was the second line of breakers. Again we set to and bailed furiously. Fortunately, the storm had now quite gone by, and the moon shone brightly, revealing a rocky headland running half a mile or more out into the sea, of which this second line of breakers appeared to be a continuation. At any rate, they boiled around its foot. Probably the ridge that formed the headland ran out into the ocean, only at a lower level, and made the reef also. This headland was terminated by a curious peak that seemed not to be more than a mile away from us. Just as we got the boat pretty clear for the second time, Leo, to my immense relief, opened his eyes and remarked that the clothes had tumbled off the bed, and that he supposed it was time to get up for chapel. I told him to shut his eyes and keep quiet, which he did without in the slightest degree realizing the position. As for myself, his reference to chapel made me reflect, with a sort of sick longing, on my comfortable rooms at Cambridge. Why had I been such a fool as to leave them? This is a reflection that has several times recurred to me since, and with ever increasing force. But now again we were drifting down on the breakers, though with lessened speed, for the wind had fallen, and only the current or tide, it afterwards turned out to be the tide, was driving us. Another minute, and with a sort of howl to Allah from the Arab, a pious ejaculation from myself, and something that was not pious from Job, we were in them. And then the whole scene, down to our final escape, repeated itself, only not quite so violently. Mohammed's skillful steering and the airtight compartments saved our lives. In 5 minutes we were through, and drifting, for we were too exhausted to do anything to help ourselves except keep her head straight, with the most startling rapidity round the headland which I have described. Round we went with the tide, until we got well under the lee of the point, and then suddenly the speed slackened. We ceased to make way, and finally appeared to be in dead water. The storm had entirely passed, leaving a clean washed sky behind it. The headland intercepted the heavy sea that had been occasioned by the squall, and the tide, which had been running so fiercely up the river, for we were now in the mouth of a river, was sluggish before it turned. So we floated quietly, and before the moon went down managed to bail out the boat thoroughly and get her a little shipshape. Leo was sleeping profoundly, and on the whole I thought it wise not to waken him. It was true he was sleeping in wet clothes, but the night was now so warm that I thought, and so did Job, that they were not likely to injure a man of an unusually vigorous constitution. Besides, we had no dry ones at hand. Presently the moon went down, and left us floating on the waters, now only heaving like some troubled woman's breast, with leisure to reflect upon all that we had gone through, and all that we had escaped. Job stationed himself at the bow, Mohammed kept his post at the tiller, and I sat on a seat in the middle of the boat, close to where Leo was lying. The moon went slowly down in chastened loveliness. She departed like some sweet bride into her chamber, and long veil-like shadows crept up the sky through which the stars peeped shyly out. Soon, however, they too began to pale before a splendour in the east, and then the quivering footsteps of the dawn came rushing across the newborn blue, and shook the high stars from their places. Quieter and yet more quiet grew the sea, quiet as the soft mist that brooded on her bosom, and covered up her troubling, as the elusive wreaths of sleep brood upon a pain-racked mind, causing it to forget its sorrow. From the east to the west sped the angels of the dawn. From sea to sea, from mountain top to mountain top, scattering light with both their hands. On they sped out of the darkness, perfect, glorious, like spirits of the just breaking from the tomb. On over the quiet sea, over the low coastline, and the swamps beyond, and the mountains above them. Over those who slept in peace, and those who woke in sorrow. Over the evil and the good. Over the living and the dead. Over the wide world and all that breathes or has breathed thereon. It was a wonderfully beautiful sight, and yet sad, perhaps from the very excess of its beauty. The arising sun, the setting sun. There we have the symbol and the type of humanity, and all things with which humanity has to do. The symbol and the type, yes, and the earthly beginning and the end also. And on that morning this came home to me with peculiar force. The sun that rose today for us had set last night for 18 of our fellow voyagers, had set everlastingly for 18 whom we knew. The Tao had gone down with them. They were tossing about among the rocks and seaweed, so much human drift on the great ocean of death. And we 4 were saved. But one day a sunrise will come, when we shall be among those who are lost, and then others will watch those glorious rays and grow sad in their midst of beauty, and dream of death in the full glow of a rising life. For this is the lot of man. Well, we shall leave it there. Our intrepid explorers have now reached the coastline of Africa in search for this mysterious woman, perhaps, who knows the secret to immortality. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. I very much enjoyed your company. I hope you have a good rest of the day, wherever you are, whoever you are, and we shall return to this story in due course. God bless you all. Goodbye for now. Goodbye.